Liberalism originated in the late 1600s and early 1700s from Enlightenment philosophy and the writings of John Locke. But really, liberalism became popular after the French Revolution and during the Industrial Revolution. Main beliefs of liberalism included reason, progress, religious toleration, laissez-faire economic policies, but they ultimately wanted democracy as their form of government. Liberals also believed in individual rights, like protection of private property, life, and liberty. And they were also believed to be natural or God-given. Liberals believed that increased liberty in politics and increased liberty in the economy would ultimately result in social improvement and economic growth.
Considering that Great Britain was one of the first countries to experience an industrial revolution, it is no surprise that it was also known to be an exceptionally receptive environment for liberalism. Liberals generally applauded the social and economic changes produced by the Industrial Revolution, and Britain's rapid urbanization provided more and more opportunities for liberalism to develop. In the same token, Britain's ability to adapt to the challenge of liberalism was exactly what allowed it to avoid revolutionary upheaval. There are many examples of these adaptations, some of which include the abolition of slavery, the Reform Act, and the Poor Law. The Poor Law, in fact, made relief for the poor more difficult and unpleasant than any job, which directly reflected the liberal principle of self-help. British liberals tended to want deregulation of trade, but they were opposed to revolutionary violence. They wanted government's economic role to be limited to maintaining currency, enforcing contracts, and financing major enterprises such as the military and the railroads. One of the most famous British liberals was the philosopher Jeremy Bentham. He is most known for articulating the approach of utilitarianism, but he also argued for the separation of church and state, granting women's rights, properly managing the poor, and abolishing slavery. He opposed the parliamentary process, the abuses of the prisons, and the educational system. Another example of British liberalism can be seen in the response to the British Corn Laws. The Corn Laws benefited landowners and were established in order to protect British grain from competition, but they harmed consumers by raising prices, and they went against the liberal principle of free trade. This led to numerous democratic movements arguing for political reform, and one of the most notable reactions was the formation of the Anti-Corn Law League. This league was established after efforts to lower grain tariffs were shut down in the House of Commons, and it appealed to the middle class, went against landlords, and promised lower food prices. It also published newspapers and the journal The Economist, and in 1846, the Corn Laws were finally repealed.
Continental liberalism is a type of liberalism that differs from English liberalism. Although in English liberalism, its believers never truly wanted the end of privilege based on social and economic classes, continental liberalism believes differently. It is made with the idea of equality because it opposes the ideas of privilege based on social class. The government is made to support either full equality or Continental liberalists focused heavily on constitutional reform as well. Some continental liberalism came in the idea that free trade was not appealing because of the protection needed from Britain's industrial dominance. John Stuart Mill was a 19th century English philosopher who used his works to promote liberty. He believed that liberty, equality, and utilitarianism were all intertwined. He was an advocate for freedom, with the beliefs that freedom should be granted to all unless given a reason for it to be taken away from them. He was also in support of the slight intervention of the government into society by protecting the amount of hours employees were allowed to work. He believes that the government should make decisions that will satisfy the largest amount of citizens possible. His works elaborated on the ideas of David Ricardo and Adam Smith, and he was also involved in creating the ideas of economics of scale, opportunity cost, and comparative advantage in trade.
Thomas Robert Malthus noticed the pattern between the relationship of food production and population growth, which was that it doubled every 25 years. They both increased, which was known by other philosophers, but he was the first to look into how to get a leveling population. He believed that people should choose to reduce population growth. The relationship Malthus identified was that as food supply increases, food becomes cheaper and more children are born, but as there are more people to feed, food becomes more expensive and families limit children. Malthus's conclusion was that since humanity has not starved to death, economic choices must be at work. As well, he wrote before the Industrial Revolution, so he never fully appreciated the effects of technology on food production. Today, Malthusian is used to describe how overpopulation will ultimately lead to the demise of the human race.
Another influential liberalist during this time was David Ricardo. He created the Iron Law of Wages. Here are some principles of the Iron Law of Wages. The Iron Law of Wages stated that the price of labor always tended towards the natural substance level. It also stated that laborers tended to expand their families with a rise in their incomes. This meant more availability of labor in the long run, and that was a result of the extended families. Also, more labor led to a drop in wages. Therefore, there was no point in trying to raise the price of labor. Here are some buzzwords that will help you remember the topic of liberalism. First, liberty. Liberty is a state of being free within society from oppressive restrictions. Liberalists believed that liberty was beneficial in politics and economic matters and would promote social improvement and economic growth. Next is laissez-faire. This meant that there should be no government interference in economic affairs. In other words, there should be a free market, and the main promoter of this idea was Adam Smith. Next was reform. Liberals were in favor of political, social, or economic changes that would improve society. Then, natural rights. Liberalists believed in the protection of our natural rights, including life, liberty, and property. Lastly, progress. Liberals have a willingness to embrace and initiate change. They're open to new ideas, and they are forward thinkers.